I now call this committee of the whole of the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. First order of business, I'll ask for a moment of silence. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First item is, and Harry and Luann, you're able to hear us all right and everything?
We sure are. Hear us okay?
What? All right.
Hi, everybody.
Our first topic will be data review protocol. Did you need to say anything, Superintendent?
Sure. Today on our agenda, we have 3 items. The first one is going to be a review of data protocols and things that the school board should think about while we're listening to a data presentation. The second thing on our agenda will be a data presentation delivered by Shane Williams and Corey Guy. And then the third thing that we have on our agenda will be an update on youth leadership teams and the progress of that inside of our district. And so with that being said, Harry, if your team wouldn't mind walking us through the things that we should keep in mind as a board administrative team as we're looking at data, I would like to introduce the board to a term that I recently heard a leader say, and I think it's exactly what our next steps are. In Davenport, we need to develop, a cadence of what and how we review data. This notion that we regularly are looking at data, that we are regularly asking questions, because when our school board does that, the focus now becomes on those outcomes. And so the very next step for us, and this is is to review this data that we're looking at today, and and the topics that we review will continue to grow, but consider this an introductory data review for today, and we will continue to try and develop that cadence, that routine, and that procedure that are critical for our eyes to see data. So Harry, with that being said, go ahead and take the lead, and then we'll ask Shane to deliver Shane and Corey to deliver the presentation. Thank you.
Hang on one second, Harry. For the record, I just wanted to note that Director Potts is not on. I think he was having issues connecting to the internet where he's at. And Director Beck is at home as well. She wasn't feeling well, and she might not be able to vocally participate because she wasn't able to talk very much. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, but she is here listening and everything else. I'll turn it over to you now, Harry.
That sounds great. And Director Gosa and Superintendent Schneckloth, a quick clarification for us, a little debrief toward the end. Do you want to build that in after the early literacy and the disproportionality, or do you want Lou and I to wait and just lead that short little discussion at the end of all 3 topics? You can think about that and flag us on that.
Let's do it directly after the data review.
Yeah.
All right, sounds great. Love the word cadence, and you've heard Luann and me before describe some similar kinds of words, which Superintendent Schneckloth mentioned again, routine or habit. That's really what we're after, so helping support your work in this becoming a habit. And as Luann and I prepped for this evening, an additional piece we want to layer on with those data questions or protocol. So Joe, if you would pull up the goals again, this is another really important piece, not only for you as a board superintendent leadership team, but also to continue to keep these goals in front of your staff and community. In your board meetings, think of those as one of your main pathways to keep the goals in front of yourselves and in front of your stakeholders. And we think as part of this cadence or routine, one way to do that is really for each meeting, you ought to be able to look at your agenda at the beginning, at the end, or both, and say, which key items are we focused on tonight that sync or align with one or more of our board superintendent goals. And that's another good habit to continue to keep chipping away at. So I would ask you this. As you take the first topic, early literacy, and would you skim these 6 goals? I think you also may have them at your places. And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or a minute to look at the 6 goal items. And when you think of early literacy, be ready to talk for a minute about which one or more of those goals does that literacy report, that update you're going to receive tonight, strike you as it lines up really well and strongly with this goal. Which goal or goals would you choose? And President Gosa, be ready to just help us call on a couple of folks to share. We'll give you about 20, 30 seconds to just reskim them, revisit those 6 goals. Particularly the opening line item, but sometimes it helps to look at those sub-bullets underneath. And President Gosa, what do your colleagues have to say? Which one or more goals seem like a clear direct link?
Director Snyder's sitting right across from me. I'll call on him first.
All righty.
Goal 5.
Okay. Yeah, and Luann and I were projecting that as well, certainly. Is there anything else that we could probably make a case for several of these, but is there are there any other goals that you'd say it also maybe not as strongly but syncs up with as well?
Would you like me to randomly call on another board member, Harry?
That'd be perfect, or take a volunteer even if you want. That question's a little more of a stretch.
Volunteers. Director Hayes.
Number 5 was my first choice, but I'll select number 1.
And Director Hayes, that aligns with Luann's and my thinking as we plan for tonight. These regular updates, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, and a progress report, both those bullets. Thank you. Any others? Those were the 2 that Luann and I identified first, but anything else strike you?
Harry, I'll go with goal 2 because it does help build the trust relationship with the board and the superintendent that, we're getting the accurate data and, the superintendent's willing to have his staff come and, present this stuff to us and what the board is looking for. So I think that one could be kind of tied in there too.
It certainly can. And what Luann and I would invite your board and your whole board and superintendent team to do is, again, when you spend an hour or 2 or longer like tonight on areas like this, it's worth it in terms of flagging yourselves and your community on here's what we're after tonight, and these are why these agenda items are so important. And we understand when you're in a regular meeting versus a committee of the whole like tonight you have 3 topics. In a regular meeting you'll have more, but maybe potentially, but all the more reason to identify which key goals and keep these in front of yourselves and your community. I would look for a volunteer or 2, President Gosa, that might share why might that be helpful. Why are Luann and Harry encouraging us as part of our cadence or routine to take a minute or 2 and align the goals, sync them up with the main topics for the night? How's that a benefit?
Director Hayes.
I feel as long as we're aligned with the goals, we're staying on task and we're not dragging ourselves off into the weeds, taking conversations that really are not relevant to the topics at that time.
That's really helpful. And while there might be other important things you do need to talk about, this keeps kind of grounding or bringing you back. Anyone else, President Gosa?
Director Snyder.
Looking at the questions that we reflect on, it helps us kind of pre-ask some of those questions. How will this relate to something that we're looking at, or will this cover a certain area? Just kind of prepare for the question portion.
That's really nice too. Thank you. Good, real helpful insight. And one of the things that's really been kind of music to Luann's in my ears is when we heard your superintendent 2-3 months ago say, and I saw lots of board members head nodding, when Superintendent Schneckloth said, boy, I need to make sure that these questions, which we'll take a peek at next, again, a quick review, that my administrative team or other staff presenting know that ahead of time. It shouldn't be a secret. The kinds of key insights and information you're looking to gather or glean from the staff presentations. So, and I think a final thought about these goals is it can be really healthy that periodically you just ask yourselves as a board team, hey, how'd we do? Are we giving adequate time at our meetings to at least one or two of these goals? Because that's how you keep it in front of you. So with that, Luann, any additional insights you have, or would you move us into a quick refresher on those questions?
No, I think that was great, Harry. Great revisit on how to keep the main thing the main thing. I remember working with you all several months ago, and I believe it was President Gosa that was saying, can you help us think about what questions we should be asking? And that was a great way for us to then move forward together. And let's just talk about, just as a refresher, why did we come up with these questions? It wasn't like Harry just one day just kind of cherry picked them and said, oh, these sound really good. But Joel, if you don't mind, can you put up the 5 roles of the board document that's in your packet? And I would invite everyone to get the 8 questions. I believe you've got a laminated set. At least they're in your packet. They may be your own laminated set, but let's have you put those side by side along with this document that Joel's sharing. Thank you so much. But the questions that we generated at your request was really a great exercise for us as well. But just as a reminder that these questions are really at that governance level, which really get at your policymaking role, where you leverage your work as the board team the most effective. And we thought it would be helpful to look at this framework where we used it to develop these questions as a refresher. And some of you might even remember Patty Schrader and I shared these with you several months ago, and it's okay if you don't remember because a lot has happened since then. But we're just going to do a quick crosswalk between the questions and these 5 roles of the board that came out of our own research on highly effective boards. And let's take a look at how those questions link back to these roles. So if you take a look at skim those roles real quick. They're pretty simple statements, but it's pretty profound. So it's a good, pretty comprehensive work. But let's take a look at question 2. Where are we making progress and how do we know? That links right back to role 3, holding the system accountable to the expectation, monitoring progress, listening to staff, updates. As you said, TJ, looking at data, that cadence and habit of practice, that's a key role of the board, monitoring progress. And I would suggest that other questions that link right back to that role, if you take a look at question 3, where have we not made progress? You're getting right back to that role of the board of holding the system accountable. You set your goal, and now you're checking in. How are we doing? Are we making progress? Where do we need to go next? I would also suggest if you look at question 5, what are the next steps? What will progress look like? Again, these come from what we know from research and best practice is the key roles of the board. Let's just take one more, for example. If you look at question 4, what essential support is needed from this board superintendent team to help move us forward? We think that's one of the most significant questions you can ask. These are all important, but that one we really like a lot. That goes right to role 2, creating conditions for success. You set the expectations, you support it, and then you monitor progress over time. So we just wanted to go back and anchor those questions in the research of highly effective boards as a helpful reminder that those governance level questions can be really powerful when, as TJ said, you're using those as a habit of practice. We're going to Oh, one more point I'd like to make. You've got eight great questions. They all are important. But depending on where you're at in relation to the work of reaching those goals and where the staff is, some questions will be more applicable the evening during the presentation than others. And so we're going to have you now take a minute and get the questions in front of you. And based on what you know, where you're at now, in regards to your early literacy goal and your disproportionality goal, individually, just pick 3 or 4 questions that you think you would ask that might provide the most helpful information or insights this evening. And then we're going to share out in just a minute. So just go back, pick the 3 or 4 questions that speak to you regarding those 2 topics that you're going to hear about in your data presentation in a few minutes.
And Joel, if you would roll ahead to page 2 of document 3, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Mm-hmm.
And take a minute to do that, and then we're going to have you share out which the questions that you selected. And President Gosa, would you let me know when you see most people about ready to share, please?
I think we're good, Luann.
Okay. Harry, would you do us a favor and be our tally man? What I'm going to have you do, Dan, if you don't mind, would you just go around the room and ask each person which questions they selected? And Harry, would you do me a favor and tally the number of people that selected each question?
You bet. And if Dan, if you'll just have them say number 1, 3, 5, and 7, I'll do a quick count that way.
Thank you. So Dan, if you don't mind going around the room and calling on each person.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Director Snyder.
Okay, I've got mine, and I've also got Director Beck. She's shooting me some texts here and there. So for me, I said 1, 3, and 6. And Director Beck says 1, 3, and 6 also, actually. She says 3 because literacy directly relates to disproportionality, and 6 because it needs to be sustained.
Okay. Next.
Director Poston.
1, 2, 6.
Okay.
Director Klein-Jerome.
1, 2, 3, 5.
Director Hayes.
1, 2, and 5.
And I picked 2, 3, and 4. Do you want me to include the superintendent on this one, or you just want the board?
TJ, do you have anything to add?
My mind automatically went to number 6.
Okay, Harry, would you
You bet.
do that? I have a drum roll. Would you do the reveal, please?
You bet. So I just asked board members and Superintendent Schneckcloth to just make a note on your questions that the ones that popped up most frequently were 1, 2, 3, and 6. And those all had 4 or 5 people that identified them. 1, 2, 3, and 6. It doesn't mean the others aren't important. We just asked you to speculate, but that'll set up an interesting frame as you listen during the presentation tonight.
And Allison, thank you I'm so sorry that you weren't able to verbally share, but I'm glad you shared your rationale for your thinking. Does anybody else would like to share why they picked the questions that they did. It'd be nice to hear a couple more from you, a couple other folks.
I'll just go ahead and call on the two that haven't done it yet. How about that? Director Klein Jerome.
I went with 1, 2, 3, and 5. Basically, 2 and 3. Where are we making progress? Where are we not making progress? And what are the next steps we're going to take on the areas we aren't making progress? Is why I picked those. And I also 1, but that's just where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Director Poston.
Well, first, I think number 1, we know we need to know where we're at, of course, and then number 6 is important, as Allison mentioned. We've got to keep it in the forefront and not lose sight of our goal.
Anything else?
Director Snyder.
There's so many of these that apply that, I actually had trouble just narrowing it down to 3. But, I think number 1 is going to apply more times than not, because you always want to know where we sit in relation to our goal. But I think one of the, ultimately as important questions, it's important to know where we are making progress, and celebrate those progresses and see if we can use some of our success there to ultimately get to number 3 as where we're not making the progress, because that obviously needs more attention. And then number 6, just to keep it in the forefront, so that it doesn't slip by and we just move on, so that we're always looking at it.
And, thank you for pointing out that monitoring progress isn't a negative. It's actually, it can be a real benefit, because you can stop and celebrate those successes along the way. Thanks for pointing that out, which is so important when you're talking about a long process of hard work. These questions, sometimes you're going to hear those answers as the presenters share the information, and that is great. But other times you may find yourself needing to ask one or more of these questions, and that's fine too. So with that, Harry, do you have any other insights to share before we hand it over to Shane and Corey?
Nope, it's their show.
Okay, take it away, gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is Corey? Ladies, I'm so sorry about that, but thanks for correcting it.
Brenda, will you switch it over to the other screen, or does somebody behind the scenes do that? There we go. All right, so I think that did a really nice job of setting the stage for the conversation tonight. We really want this to be a discussion among board members, as well as some questions, so we know with concrete specificity what the next steps are in terms of board requests and whatnot to follow up on these data. Today's data overview is going to be a pretty high level. We're not going to dial it down to the fine grain size, but certainly that could be a next step if the board chooses to go that direction. But we are going to be looking at some system-wide data, and I think that those goals that you've set the stage for will really help to put this in the right context.
We'll say later. Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to start with some Davenport literacy scores for K-6. And again, just to take a step back and to understand a little bit about the nature of the assessment that we're going to be looking at, the state of Iowa has established 6 what they call healthy indicators. And these are indicators of what a healthy, high-functioning system would look like. So, for example, the first indicator, in a healthy, high-functioning system, you would screen a minimum of 95% of your students in literacy. Second one is 90% of the students who score below benchmark would receive some type of progress monitoring, or you would know, are they making progress on an ongoing basis? The goal that we're really going to focus on tonight in terms of the healthy indicators is that third one, which is that 80% of the students who are screened are at or above benchmark. That's not to say that the rest of these healthy indicators are not important. They're all indicative of a healthy, high-functioning system. That said, we're going to focus on what the actual outcome measure is and center our conversation around that particular healthy indicator. So just to keep in mind, the goal that the state has established is that 80% of your students who are screened would be at or above benchmark. One thing to keep in mind with the literacy assessment is they establish a cut score, and anybody above that cut score is considered proficient or on grade level, so to speak. Anybody below that is considered not proficient or below grade mark. So it's a binary. You're either above the line or you're below the line. That's what all these percentages are going to be based on. So first slide is just a real high level overview across the different grade levels. You can see kindergarten down here on the far left. You can see where they were in the fall of 2020 and where they tested in the winter of 2021, so same school year. You can see that across each of the grade levels. And again, what these percentages represent, so you can look over here, approximately mid to upper 50s scored at or above benchmark in the fall if you're a kindergartner. And then you can see when the winter scores came around, they dropped to about 44, 45% of them were at or above benchmark. The next slide actually has this broken out in a table so you can see exactly what those numbers are that are associated with each of the bars. But I think this gives a good just kind of bird's eye view or that 30,000 foot perspective on the nature of where grade levels are. I want to pause there just to see if board members have any immediate takeaways just from that initial glance at where the district is from kindergarten through sixth grade with respect to literacy scores and proficiency rates.
Director Snyder.
I guess I'll ask the obvious. It seems almost every grade level except one dropped from winter of 21 to fall of 20. Is there a reason why every grade level sort of dropped some? And is that trend seen in other districts?
So two questions there. Is that trend normal? No, it's not. I would say that's an atypical trend. Now, keep in mind that it is a moving target. So where the students are expected to be in fall is different than where they're supposed to be expected in winter. That's natural. So a kindergarten student in the fall is going to have a certain level of skills. Well, in the winter, they're expected to have a higher level of skills. So it is a moving target. Nevertheless, they're expected to keep pace with that target, if not to exceed that target and to close the gap. So I would say that trend is atypical. This year is unique. There's not much that is typical about this year. So keep that in mind as well. And compared to other districts, there are other districts did in some cases experience a decrease, not as widespread as this. When we looked at our aggregated data across the 21 districts that we serve, this would probably be at one end of the distribution in terms of that, and not the end of the distribution you'd want to be at.
One other important thing to add with that is the winter screening window was right when we were still in a hybrid model. So the goal would be in spring. We're now back face to face. Those students had, that face to face instruction just half of the time.
Just to give you a little bit of context, so when we look at, there was across our AEA, there were other grade levels that dropped. Kindergarten seems to be a fairly pervasive pattern. Now, these scores do include Davenport, so I'm not sure what would happen if you took Davenport's out. Davenport is by far our largest district, so certainly they have an impact on the aggregated scores. First grade went up across districts as an average. Second grade went up. Third grade was pretty standard. Fourth, fifth, and sixth had a small decrease.
Do the other districts that we have data on, were they collected? I mean, do they have the same screening process that Davenport uses?
Yeah, it's actually a state mandated process. There's
Okay.
a window of time during which you have to assess, again, at least 95% of your students. So every district has to screen somewhere within that window. Now this year, the districts were given a lot of latitude. Typically that screening window is a little bit more narrow, but because of the nature of variability and unpredictability this year, they extended that screening window pretty wide open. So some districts tested a little earlier in the window and other districts tested a little bit later in the window. So there's going to be more variance this year than there ever has been.
I've got one more. Can I ask it? You said this data is kind of from an elevated view, without getting too microscopic, but is there a way to know of the students screened, like how many And like what percentage is doing online still versus what's in person?
Do you have that in campus, or
We do.
is that flagged?
We could find that out. It would be in our Tableau
Okay.
data. This is pulled from the state report in Panorama. So
Okay.
those students are not flagged in Panorama of whether they were online only or they were participating in the hybrid model.
Thank you.
I have a question since no one else. So, I guess I'll kind of ask for your expertise on this. When you see this, what are the key indicators that we should be looking for that obviously there's something wrong and it needs to be fixed? So, what would be some factors that would factor into that we would want to look at?
Your kindergarten and first grade data are alarming. That needs to be corrected. And I know your teachers are working hard in their buildings and putting in the time and effort. There are some structural challenges because of COVID and the way education's been delivered for the first half to 2/3 of the year. That's presented some just massive challenges for people. Kindergarten and first grade really need a lot of attention. Principals and teachers need your support. You're going to have to do something that is going to mitigate that learning loss. Keep in mind those kids. So these are kids that were the most vulnerable through the pandemic because their skills were not firmly established. You see decreases less at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade because for the most part, those foundational skills were established. So going several months without school, sure, it's not good for them, but they're not going to slip back. Like when you're a first grade student and you're experiencing that, or a kindergarten student when you're experiencing that, and those early literacy skills are so pivotal at that moment, and then you go without structured setting for 5 to 6 months, it has a major impact on the children. And so this is a long-term challenge. It's not going to be resolved between now and the end of the year. You're going to need some structured focus on literacy for probably multiple years. I don't see any way around that. It's correcting those deficits it's going to be a Herculean challenge. And I think Davenport's up to that. I think if you equip your teachers with strong professional development, a systematic deployment of effective strategies, you hold yourselves as a board accountable for results, you can certainly move the needle and close that gap. It's not going to happen by doing business as usual. The gaps are just too big.
And I know you said this was kind of a broad thing, but I'm assuming that this would be broken down by building so we would know right away what building is struggling the most, what one's doing the best, so that we knew where we needed the supports.
Yeah, your administrative team's doing that. I'm confident in TJ and his team to be able to do that. That's probably not something that's difficult to share at a board meeting. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Kind of creates an environment where, finger pointing and I don't think that's productive of a healthy system. But behind the scenes, for sure, some schools are going to need more targeted supports than others. I think that's undeniable.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Director Poston.
So what types of interventions are we going to need to implement? And I don't know, the other question is what it's going to cost us.
I got that one. So right now we are in heavy discussions with the Amy Williamson and Dr. Lebo over this exact issue, and the Department of Ed is putting out a list of best practices to accelerate learning, and so we're highly anticipating that. Also, as you're looking at this data, know that our next go-to is in the area of early literacy and MTSS supports. And so when you look at the plan that we have, one of the next big lifts that we are going to move into is early literacy. And so with the support of the Department of Ed and our ESSER dollars that we have allocated, with the best practices from the Department of Education, or where we're going to deploy those things. I love the way that Shane said that, in a systematic approach where we are looking at that and asking those questions on a regular basis is when the change is going to happen. So to answer your question, the accelerated learning best practices, the Department of Ed is working very diligent on that right now. Our resources are going to come from our ESSER funds, and there's, I believe, another round of ESSER funds coming out, and we still haven't really even tapped our ESSER $2. So,
Well, accelerated learning and best practices, that doesn't tell me anything. So are we saying we're going to have more reading interventionists, math interventionists? I mean, what's actually going to happen in the classroom?
Those are, I would almost guarantee you that those strategies will be inside this guide that the Department of Ed puts out. I would also imagine that there will be things that are inside the core, because you can't intervene your way out of there. So we'd have to have it to ensure that we are meeting all of the standards. We would have to adjust our standards and our pacing guides and things of that nature. Plus, there's no substitute for more time with students, and how to get that the best possible way is going to be critical that we do that with. Because as we know, during this time, students are really stressed out, and the only way to bridge this gap is more time with them. And so sometimes when students are at the end of a long day, the last thing they want to do is go into a pretty intensive reading intervention at the end of the day. So the best practices in that area deployed with the amount of time that we have is going to be absolute critical to closing.
Yeah, and I'll just reemphasize that you're not going to close the gap with more time, and time means dollars, and it's going to cost money for sure. I mean, fortunately, the government has appropriated dollars for that specific purpose, and time also means people, and that's your most valuable resource. It's not going to come. There's no magic program out there that's going to radically transform, and it's going to come through people using strategies with kids in a very intensive fashion, small groups, and it's got to happen in some respects outside the school day. You think about it, how much time 5 and 6 year olds lost from last spring to the fall. You're not going to be able to take the 6-hour instructional day and squeeze more into that. You're just not going to do that. You're going to have to do something that's outside the box and outside the formal structure. That's not to say that your day can't be restructured. There's only so much you can do in a 6-hour day with kids. So I think you're going to have to think about some ways to disrupt that traditional delivery model.
Go ahead, Director Poston.
Well, a lot of our classrooms, especially in the elementary, there's 27, 28, 29 kids in a classroom. And so when we talk about getting more time to these students, that's going to be tough. In an elementary with 400 or 500 students, one reading interventionist. So explain to me how we're going to catch up.
You and me too.
Again, utilizing those dollars, utilizing the dollars that we have to deploy research-based strategies. And I think I'm saying we are going to need to hire people to do this work. Is that the question that you're asking, Director Poston?
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely
we're
right.
We're going to need to hire more people, but at the same time, we're cutting staff. When I understand why we've had to do that, nobody questions that. But now, in this time of whatever you want to call it, crisis or whatever, how are we going to get it done, and how are we going to remain on budget?
Absolutely. So that's a wonderful question. So when we're deploying these dollars, it's absolutely critical that we pay attention to when these dollars sunset. We have experience with grants, things of that nature, and it's going to be absolutely critical that this group of people, the board and administration, keep an eye on when those do sunset, and that we're only issuing contracts that go through that. And if we do find a practice that is something that we want to continue and sustain, then we have to utilize our current dollars that we have to sustain that and make the necessary cuts, very similar to the process that we did right now. So to go back and answer your question, we have $21 million to spend in 2 years. That's a lot of people, small groups to really address this issue. And in order to do that, we're going to have to systemically deploy those resources and ensure that they're research-based. And that's why I'm the research-based part of the strategies. I'm very excited about that coming from the Department of Ed. The management of our resources, of who we're hiring and how long we're hiring them, is something that the Finance Committee is going to have to pay very close attention to. That's an excellent point as we do this work. Thank you, Kent.
One analogy, just real quick, to again maybe to help wrap our brains around this too, the universal screener is analogous to you going to the doctor and getting a physical. You go, you get a physical, maybe some issues are identified, but it doesn't pinpoint exactly what the issue is. For that, you need some type of diagnostic follow-up test. And so that's what this is doing. It's basically telling you what is the overall health of our system. And again, to Director Gosa's point or President Gosa's point, you can look at kindergarten and first grade, and it's undeniable that the health of your system in those two grade levels in particular are going to need something that's qualitatively different than what you've done in the past. And I think that's what you're asking too, Director Poshman. What is that qualitatively different delivery model look like for our young children? That's what we need to figure out. We need to identify what those strategies are, have a very coherent focus on what those are, be outcomes driven, and then for the next 2 years, just keep our eyes on that with a laser focus.
Director Klein, Jerome, you had a question?
I don't disagree that we need people in the building, but I also know that our elementary buildings, by leaving those sixth graders in there, have pushed them to the limits for, some of them are teaching out of closets and that kind of thing. So you're going to put more resources into a building and they have no place to go. So I think we need to be thinking about, you can't hold anymore in an elementary building. What do we need to be doing about that? I also just want to say I appreciate the fact that you said teachers are working hard, because I know from being in the classroom and kids taking tests, I took them personally. If my scores weren't where they should be, I felt it was, what did I not do or whatever. And I don't think as a district we are giving credit enough to teachers who are truly working their fannies off trying to get this. And then when they get those results, it is very deflating. And so there needs to be more acknowledgement that we understand you have done, and that needs to be done regularly.
Yeah, and I think the same is true with principals. I think your teachers and principals are probably losing sleep in a lot of respects over these data. And I think that that's, again, they're committed to the kids and to the community, and they want to do better. And they've been presented with an enormous challenge. And as a board, as a governance body, part of your function is to help them out, to create a system that supports them. That's one of the guiding principles that was up there was holding the system accountable, but then also supporting the system.
I just want to add one thing. I do appreciate the fact that you said about spending the dollars and whatever resources we do, we need to be accountable for that, because far too long in this district have we just thrown money at things and never made sure it was sustainable. And then we wind up, it's a budgetary thing, and now it's sucking out of the budget and taking away from other things. So I do appreciate that you did bring that up. Director Snyder.
I've got a couple questions from Director Beck. She's curious how this data compares to prior years. And I'll let you.
So
we have a slide on that we'll get to.
Okay, that is upcoming then. And then she is curious if we are planning any sort of summer literacy program to give the kids more time, because frankly, research shows that out of school time results in more loss over the summer.
So we do have a group of people poised to act in terms of summer school in that arena, and it's pre-K-12. So we are ready to act on that. We're getting late in the game, so we're very anxious about that. So again, we are waiting for those best practices for the Department of Ed's lead on that, and I know that they're working very diligent at that. And so that's what we're waiting for right now. But we are continuing to work on the infrastructure of those items, because it will be something that we will be offering this summer.
Yeah, to Director Beck's point, there's summer learning loss in the normal situation because you're going 10 weeks for the most part without structured instructional time for most kids. Now take that and multiply it by a much higher factor, and that's what happened last year. And we also know that summer learning loss affects different groups of kids differently. It doesn't affect all kids the same way, and we need to acknowledge that too.
Director Poston.
So, and maybe this would just be a guess on your part, but give us your best guess. when we look at these scores, is it directly related to reading? I mean, if we raise the reading skills, reading levels, will that improve everything else? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, if you improve the reading skills, that's for sure going to show up on this particular assessment. And there is some research in the literature that shows reading has what's called a halo effect. If you improve reading skills, that affects math skills, social studies skills, science skills. We also know that there's some correlations in the research between reading proficiency as well as social emotional behavioral health. Kids that are underperforming and are not at grade level as of third grade, that shows up later, higher dropout rates, higher incidence of mental health issues, and a lot of other factors. So, I mean, to answer your question, I would say yes, all the above.
Director Kleindrum.
This test, is it how fast they read? Is there comprehension? What is actually being tested?
So this year, the K1 is early literacy. So it's a combination of a multiple subset test. So it's a composite. And that stayed the same. That's always been our default screener for kindergarten and first grade. For second through sixth grade, this year, due to school closure and also due to we had students online, our default screener became A reading. And so in the past, A reading is an adaptive assessment that's looking at comprehension skills. We were given the window to change our default. Many districts did the same thing because the A reading test is on the computer, whereas the CBM has to be delivered individually. So the amount of time that it takes to do that when you only have students half of the time is very difficult. It's also very difficult to do the CBM screener online in an online format. So second through sixth grade, A reading, kindergarten and first grade, it's the early literacy assessment.
Which is both speed and
So early
comprehension?
literacy is going to be looking at subset skills like phonemic awareness, right? Your phonics skills. It's going to be looking at your basic print concepts in kindergarten, and those assessments change a little bit from winter into from fall to winter. So it's looking at, do they have the skills ready to be able to read? So it's those phonemic awareness and phonics.
Director Snyder.
I guess one other thing, we had students basically from say March till August, almost beginning of September, no instruction, correct?
I don't know what they're.
We gave instruction. It was not a required instructional model, if you remember. So we provided online learning tools. Teachers were sending, videos to students and still meeting with students, but it wasn't a required delivery model at that time.
So
There were
do we
students who
have
did
any
it.
idea of like the participation rate at then?
I do believe we had that data that we collected that at one time.
And I apologize because that was
No,
just
from
before I
March
got
to-
back on the board. So
Last year from
yeah.
March to August, yes, we have data that shows how many times a student logged in to online instruction. Our teachers kept, they kept logs of how many students were actually were accessing the learning.
Okay. Thank you.
So I would like to emphasize to the board that I believe we're on slide 2 of about 20.
We have a dozen of these.
A dozen slides. And so this level of involvement, level of engagement is absolutely exciting. The conversations that we're having, I guarantee you there are a lot of administrators listening right now. And so the cascading effect that's being happened by the conversations that we have are going to be vital as we move forward. So
Carry on. I'm sure you'll answer some of our questions on some of these other slides.
So this table shows the exact same thing as the last one. You can this one didn't have the actual number, so you kind of had to use the y-axis to figure out where we were. This one breaks it down and shows you exactly the percentage of students who made that cut score who are at or above the proficiency level. And again, we've talked a lot about first grade, and for sure, so those first grade students were kindergarten students, and if you think about it, they essentially missed the last third of that kindergarten year. And we know our kindergarten teachers are so critical to early literacy development, and those students who were 5 and 6 at the time missed out on that roughly last third of the year. So they missed out on a lot of those foundational skills, and then they're coming into first grade, and then the task before a first grade teacher is, I have to teach them first grade standards, while at the same time closing the gap to make up for that learning loss. And it's just it's a big mountain to climb. These first grade scores this is consistently across the entire state. First grade, what current first graders, last year's kindergartners, were the group that were the hardest impacted by the pandemic and school closures. That said, we have to do something about it. We can't just admire the data and say, that's too bad. We have to do something about it and try to close the gap as rapidly as we possibly can for all those kids. But I think just this puts it in stark relief when you actually see the numbers and how big that gap is. So this is broken down by race, ethnicity from fall to winter. I think this speaks to that disproportionality piece. And again, if we have a high functioning MTSS system, what you're trying to do is focus on outcomes. You have consistent deployment of those high leverage strategies. You're narrowing achievement gaps, and then you have coherence across the system. And one of those that you'll see is you'll see gaps start to close if you have a strong MTSS system, not widen. So the longer the kids are with you, you want that gap to close that maybe they come into school with. So this is a fall to winter snapshot. We also have a multi-year snapshot of that in a subsequent slide.
Better keep rolling. There's no hands up.
All right. Another very key demographic is your free and reduced students compared to students who do not qualify for free and reduced lunches. And of the students who were screened on the universal screener, which is almost 8,000 students, 57% of your students in this data set qualify for free and reduced lunches. So you can see that's a very significant portion of your community that's reflected up there. And again, you can see the achievement gap there. 64% of your students who are non-free and reduced were at benchmark compared to 46. And you do see that an achievement gap widening there. So both groups experienced a decrease from fall to winter. Again, that's a moving target, but you can see that students who qualified for free and reduced lunch were impacted more from fall to spring in a way that you don't want to, that's the direction you don't want to be going. Another key demographic here, these are your students who are English language learners and then students who are already proficient in English. So again, a comparison using benchmark scores. I would say a bright spot is while there is an achievement gap there between your already proficient students and your students who are still learning English, you can see that your ELs actually did grow from fall to winter. I think that's encouraging. Again, what we're trying to do is close the gap here. For sure, you'd like to see that gap close faster than that. Nevertheless, I think that's a bright spot that your English learners did not lose ground from fall to winter. And you have in this data set you had 207 of your students are ELs that were screened. So again, that's a significant number of students that are served in your district.
I have a quick question. What time of day are these tests taken? Is it first thing in the morning, like close to lunchtime, after lunch?
So each building administers a test during the 2-week window. For these results, so winter, you're seeing students, most likely they're doing it in the morning during their typical language arts block. If that language arts block happened in the afternoon, they would probably take the assessment in the afternoon. However, most of our building schedules have prioritized reading early in the day, so it would be earlier in the day.
Okay. The reason I asked is, like, if they had breakfast, would the scores have been a little better? If they didn't, they were hungry, would they? Because with the numbers being so high for the free and reduced, it kind of made me think about that. Thank you.
Good question.
Okay, the last subgroup that we'll look at here, students with an IEP, and then a comparison to students without an IEP. Again, you can see where those students fall, the percentage who are meeting that cut score and are above proficiency. And just for some context, you have In this data set, 1,064 students were screened who have an IEP, and then 5,847 students with no IEP were screened. Okay, so this is the historical piece that Director Beck had asked about. How does this compare to past years? So I will present, this table gets a little bit complicated, so I just want to present each of these windows so you can see a year-by-year comparison. So you can see fall to winter 18 and 19 there. And for the most part, you can see that your grades, kindergarten clearly went up. 18% more students were at benchmark in winter than they were in the fall. First grade, a little bit of a dip, held fast there. A drop in third, consistent there, increase. Sixth grade had a drop there. So again, just for some historical context, you can see how that compares. This is the subsequent year. So this would have been last school year, fall 19 to winter 20. Again, you can see that same 18% of kindergarten students moved from below proficient to proficient from fall to winter. First grade higher proficiencies, and they met that standard. They hit that moving target. Again, you can just see the breakdown here. Sixth grade, at least in this data set, sixth grade was the only grade that showed a decrease from fall to winter. And then we get into this school year. So I think that's the comparison that Director Beck was looking at or asking about in terms of what's the historical trajectory and how does this year compare. So you can easily see that this year proficiency rates are lower. Furthermore, there's more grade levels that showed that decrease than in the past. And just maybe wondering why there's a purple line here, I wanted to make sure that the board understood that there is a different assessment that was given. So the preceding years to the left here, that's back to Director Klein-Jerome's question, what assessment was actually given. So in past years, these grade levels, second through fifth, use what's called CBMR. It's a test of reading fluency. So they read for a minute, the number of words that they read accurately are counted, and then that is compared to national norms. That determines whether these students were at or above benchmark. There's a break here, as Corey had said, where because of the nature of the delivery model this year, it made more sense to move to A-Reading, which is a computer-based platform for assessment. So there is a difference in assessment here. They test overall, they test the same thing. It's an overall indicator of the health of your system. Now, you could argue, is fluency the same as comprehension? I think that the answer to that is no. So it makes the comparisons a little trickier from year to year. It does speak to the overall health of your system. It does measure somewhat of a different underlying construct in the nature of literacy and what it's testing. And so you some of this could be an artifact of the assessment that was given. I don't want to make excuses, but it was a different assessment from these 2 years. That's why that's broken apart there by that purple line.
Director Poston.
During this time frame from 2018 to 2021, was there a change in reading curriculum?
So there wasn't a change in the reading curriculum from K through fifth grade until last year. Fifth and sixth grade are now doing, they have a different curriculum. What was strategic over, if you notice, like in kindergarten, by the 1920 school year, is that class-wide interventions were done with fidelity. We had walkthroughs that were occurring in our schools to ensure that all teachers that had a classroom that had less than 60% proficient were employing a strategy-based, research-based practice called class-wide interventions. So that, I would say we saw a good increase when those strategies that are research-based were being delivered.
Are you talking right here, Corey?
Where? Yeah.
This.
In kindergarten, in our K1, yep. So if you can see, like in 19, winter of 19, and in all areas, winter of 20 increased. from the winter 2019 score.
So when a change is made in curriculum, is what determines that you're going to make that change in curriculum, and how long do you go with a certain curriculum? Do you just change for the sake of changing, or what determines when you're going to make a change?
So we typically have a 7-year curriculum adoption. There's nothing that's been very typical in the last 7 years or 5 years. And so we have not gone through the normal adoption process that we typically do. Our last adoption for reading was Wonders, which is a program, which is it's a basal reading delivery model, but it's based on strategy and not standards. So I would say it's something it's a great question. It's something that the board should follow up on, is how do we find an aligned standards-based curriculum for, especially in the early years, because our teachers are working really hard with the curriculum that they have and all the other strategies that they're employing, like 95% group, like class-wide interventions, like EAK, which is enhanced alphabetic knowledge. So they're doing a lot of things, and it's something I think you would want to follow up on.
Is the curriculum the critical part of this, or is it the teacher in the classroom? To me, it's that person standing up in front of the classroom that's more critical than the actual curriculum.
So you're absolutely correct. And that's a great statement. And many times the tools that are used, when you pick the right tool for the right situation using your data, that's when things kind of take off. And when both Shane and Corey said a systematic deployment of a tool in the right teacher's hand, giving with a fidelity check and feedback, that's the system. That's when it works. We reviewed this data in the middle of the year as a system and made it, and the AEA brought us back. We made a change. We did a re-up on the class-wide interventions and redeployed them, and it made a change in the data. So utilizing this data mid-course to make mid-course corrections, and also continuing to see longitudinal data that shows the weakness of our curriculum, so that curriculum can change over a course of time. It's something maybe we should be putting inside of our finance committee, because a big problem with a curriculum adoption is, Corey, what did the last one cost?
It was close to $1 million.
So they're extremely expensive to adopt a curriculum. So to answer your question, the most important thing in schools is relationships, building strong relationships, and having the right tools and resources, and being professionally developed, and then monitoring it.
Yeah, the sad reality with a lot of curriculums out there is they're like Swiss cheese. They come with a lot of holes, and then your teachers have to fill those holes. And I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, they've gotten better over the years, but typically what happens is you buy a one-size-fits-all curriculum, and then you have to layer on 95% or Press or Lexia on top of it. And that makes the teacher's job really complicated, because now they have to figure out how to differentiate and which strategy to deploy. So if you have a more coherent process and a more coherent curriculum, then the teachers, they can focus on teaching and not developing a curriculum or how to patch up the holes that exist in the curriculum. So I'm probably making my biases known, but I think that's pretty accurate to how curriculums are, Kent.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question is, are we spending more time teaching a curriculum rather than teaching reading, or, intervening with a teacher to teach actual reading rather than spending all the time teaching a curriculum?
Yeah, you'd be better equipped to answer that than I would.
So I think we've made great strides in the last couple of years as far as letting teachers know the parts of the basal reader, the part of the curriculum that are not essential. So there are things that we've said, don't focus your time on that. These are the essentials, right? Which is small group instruction, whole group class-wide interventions, right? And so all the things that Shane said are accurate with the more time it takes for a teacher to say, oh, I'm going to use this part, I'm going to use this, I'm going to use this. It's harder to meet all of the needs that you were just referring to when you're teaching individual students.
Well, just for, I guess, for an example, say you've got a teacher that's been teaching reading for 15, 20 years, okay? And it shows in the students that they're teaching, and scores go up. Now, to me, why do we force that teacher to adopt a certain curriculum when they already know what they're doing and they have results to show it? Am I wrong in my thinking there?
I don't think you're necessarily wrong. I think the challenge is if you want to have coherence like kindergarten all the way through sixth grade, then that teacher needs to be teaching standards that align with what comes before and what comes after. And so that's, you have to have the right balance of independence and autonomy without having every individual teacher determining how they're going to teach, because then kids from one year to the next may miss out on standards because one teacher's, they have their own projects or the ways that they want to teach, but that's maybe not aligned with the previous teacher or the next teacher. So I think there's a balance in there, empowering teachers within a system of clear expectations and accountability without just having unfettered autonomy where everybody can, and I don't think you're advocating that, but I think it's creating a really tightly aligned system, having quantifiable outcomes so people know exactly what their expectations are, and then empowering teachers to make the decisions based on their professional judgment and the kids that they have in their classrooms.
We also have high levels of mobility rates where students go from school to school, right? And if a teacher's not teaching any curriculum, they might get that great teacher for this amount of time, but when they go over here, well, they missed all those, this set of skills. So that is why you do want to have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, and it's to ensure that you have exactly what Shane said. It's aligned from K-6. There's not gaps in that system.
Director Kleindrum.
And this is for the board. When you look at that chart, and we tend to go, okay, first grade, and I'm looking at winter scores, 54, 57, 34. But you're comparing 3 different classes of kids. And my argument always was, okay, in first grade, they were at 54. In second grade, the following year, they're at 54. And the third year, they were at 56. So to look at it and you think, whoa, they've really dropped, go down and follow the grade level, because you're comparing one group of kids in third grade to next year's group of kids. You're not really comparing the same thing. So if you look diagonally down, I always contend you're looking at the same kids, not throwing it at different classes. And it's not quite as bad when you go diagonally and look. I mean, there are, yes, some things there that have dropped considerably. The 76 went to a 34 from kindergarten to first grade. But some of the others are not as bad as they appear if you just go straight across.
Director Snyder.
I don't want to drag this out, but I look at this chart and I see continued progress up until fall of 2020 to where, COVID has just completely destroyed the power that these teachers have of getting this material out to them when the kids are not sitting in their room, because as Director Postian said, and as TJ confirmed, the most powerful thing we have is that relationship with the teacher, with those kids sitting in their classroom. And when you remove that for 6 months, and then earlier I heard one of the most impacted, is kindergarten first, because there is so much learning curve when you go from kindergarten to first grade. I look at this And I guess I'm not in as much of panic mode because to me it's explainable. To me, I think the impacts of COVID are just decimating us as a district. Now, I'm not saying that we need to take it lightly, but I think there's a big reason right there. And I am completely confident in our teachers, that we're going to make up this ground. It's still pretty early. And I'm glad we're looking at this early, because if we were to come out and say in 2024, wow, we got destroyed in 2021, well, that's a lot of time. But I think we have the time to make it up, and it is going to take a lot of effort. But it, to me, looks like COVID just absolutely decimated these teachers' progress. My other question I have is, when in the fall is the testing done, and when in the winter? You guys may have said that, and if you did, I apologize.
So Davenport has a 2-week window for the assessment. So in fall of this year, that was September 21st through October 2nd. The winter scores were January 25th through February 5th, but spring will be at the end of May. So it'll be very interesting to see what ground, now that students are back 100% of the time with their teachers, what does our spring scores look like?
And where many are back 100% of the time. There's still a very large number that are not.
Yeah, I think to your point too, Director Snyder, is I look at the kindergarten scores over time. I mean, your kindergarten teachers deserve our admiration and support. And the question is, what are we going to do moving forward? Because now they're dealing with numbers that they haven't seen before. That winter 44 is not something. Look at in the past, they've moved 18% of your students from below to above. So now we have to figure out what are we going to do moving forward to support them so that they can make those gains and more to close that gap. And likewise with your first grade kids there, that again those are your 2 grade levels that have been the most impacted for the first half of the year.
Director Klein-Jerome.
And I'm not advocating for it, but the legislature has talked about it. Where are we standing with retention? If a parent comes in and said, whoa, my first grader should not be going on to second grade, where's the district are we in this process?
We're following that very closely, and we're going to be discussing that soon, because that will be. I don't know if that has passed or not. It has not, and so we're watching that very closely, because we would assume that would be the request of that. We would have some parents that would request that, and so that has implications all across our system with staffing and all kinds.
What if it doesn't pass and a parent comes to us? Do we have a response to that? Are we gonna?
So what we typically do with that is we look at all kinds of factors. But what we have a tendency to do is always keep that student with their grade level. There's a checklist that's pretty long, and every one of those things would have to be hit before you would hold somebody back. What we have typically done in our district is put together a strong plan to assist that student. So a team would get together. What does this child need to make the necessary growth while not keeping that student back? So that's typically been our plan in the district moving forward, but we are watching that very carefully. Good question. Thank you.
Move on. Okay, so same data over time. Again, to Director Beck's question, speaks to the disproportionality piece, breaking it down by different demographic groups, which will be this slide and a few subsequent ones from here. And again, you can see the changes over time, fall to winter for the 2 preceding years, and then this year. Likewise with our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. English learners. And then our students with an IEP compared to students with no IEP. Okay, I'm going to pause there just for any additional questions. And maybe even to one of the questions, I think it was for follow-up, was that goal 6? What additional follow-up or other things? So I'd be interested in hearing questions from the board on next steps or just thoughts as we close out that discussion.
Director Snyder.
Director Beck has a question. She says, given that this disproportionality has been going on for a while, are we going to just radically change the way we teach reading to someone or all of our students? Oh, to some or to all of our students, she's asking.
So our focus is on MTSS, and we talked about a systematic approach. So that's looking at core, right, tier 1, and what's good for what's good for all students is going to be effective for some. So it's looking at the system as a whole. How do we approach it to ensure that we get that core level instruction and those supports in those early grades, which is what you saw in the data.
I think everybody got all their questions out like after the second slide. I guess on one of our questions, what support is needed from the from the board superintendent team to work on correcting some of these things?
I think the very first thing that we need to do as a board superintendent team, administration team, is to continue to look at this data. I reflect on the process of looking at financial data and how each time those numbers come before us, they mean something different, and our knowledge of that data is in depth. The questions that we ask are better, and during different times of the year for that financial data, there's different things happen. The same thing happens with our student data. So I think the most important thing that we can do that relates back to one of our goals is to review data on a monthly basis, and develop a cadence to where we're asking those questions related to our goals. The second thing I think that the boards has great governance over is, are we utilizing our resources appropriately? And that question was asked tonight, and I thought that was a wonderful question. You know, how are we deploying our resources to address this issue? And then I think for us to review the plans that we have in place to move forward will be a beneficial as we move forward. Keeping the conversation here going I can't stress enough, is how we're going to hold the entire system accountable. Talking about disproportionate data. So when a student doesn't get it, they continue to get our core, but then they get more. We keep going. We keep asking why. Why until we figure it out. And so those are the two big things. Continue to talk about it here, because what this body of people, this group of humans looks at, the rest of the district follows. So that's number one. Number two, how do we utilize our resources?
Thank you. I'm assuming sometime in June, July, we would get the spring data. And then I would assume after that point in time, we would have to have a game plan in place on how we're going to correct some of this stuff. My strategic plan. I'm going to get my plug in on that.
Yes.
I guess I would like to see, okay, this is what problems we have. This is what we're going to do to correct it. And this is how we're going to measure if we're correcting that. Because if you don't have something you can look at every day, then how do you know what you're working for? And especially, I mean, even the students with IEPs, those numbers were really bad as well. So I mean, so there's going to have to be multiple plans in place because I mean, there's different demographics and different ethnicities that we're going to have to make sure we're putting plans in place to reach. I'm glad we're having these discussions because we haven't had this stuff before. So it's really easy to hold people accountable when everybody and their mother can see this because it's on, you know, our board docs and everything like that. All of our building staff see all this, and I know everyone's working really hard right now. But data doesn't lie. And if there's issues, we need to get those issues corrected so that we're on the upward. I understand this is a crazy year, and I get that, and everyone's working like crazy, and hopefully the spring numbers will really be extremely high to just kind of make all this, you know, kind of downplay this, I suppose. But I would be interested to see plans going forward on how we're going to correct these things. Director Snyder.
Director Beck has another question. There might be two in here. I'm going to go ahead and read them. She says, if it's not working, what specifically are we changing? Is the implementation of CRVP part of the supports? And then she says, do we expect to see positive changes in reading when SEBH is improved, or should we take advantage of the halo effect that Mr. Williamson mentioned? And should we put money into reading more than math or whatever else?
So I will start with this. We know that when anybody feels safe and they feel comfortable and they know the rules and procedures of the environment that they're in, that is always supportive of this type of initiative. And so it is absolutely critical that we continue to build a safe learning environment where routines are established, where students know who they can talk to, they have trusted adults. That is absolutely imperative to our system. Imperative. So I think that answered the first question. I hope.
The second one was, if it's not working, what specifically are we changing? And is the implementation, oh no, never mind, that was the first one. Do we expect to see positive changes in reading when SEBH is improved, or should we take advantage of the halo effect that Mr. Williamson mentioned?
I think it's an and in there. I think the CRVP and PBIS, those are foundational elements to a healthy system. Kids aren't going to learn if they're not feeling psychologically and physically safe. And same thing with the adults. Those pieces are starting to get established. We still have more work to do, and that's going to be it. That's not. There is no finish line that you cross there with PBIS. It's an ongoing effort year after year after year because you always have new students coming into the system, new adults coming into the system. So that's a perpetual cycle of improvement, and we need to be doing the same thing in literacy. I started the discussion talking about what the state goals are. It's 80%. You can look at your data up there. There aren't any 80s up there. We have a lot of work to do. And at the same time, let's acknowledge where we've made some enormous improvements. And you captured a couple of those, Director Snyder. The kindergarten data in past years, they are really moving the needle on student achievement. This year is clearly an anomaly. Let's focus on those, but let's also not lose sight of the fact that we aren't at 80% yet. There's still a lot of work to do, a lot of heavy lifting to do. And that's true in CRVP. That's also true in literacy. The challenge there is how do we get the system so there's a level of continuity and predictability in the PBIS, and we're doing literacy without overwhelming the system and putting too much on teachers' plates where then they're not able to do CRVP well or literacy or some of those other areas. So there's a right way to sequence this out, and that's we're trying to hit that sweet spot, that thread, that needle of let's get the PBIS, CRVP, while also not neglecting literacy, but let's not put so much on teachers' plates where they're just spinning their wheels at that point. So I just wanted to acknowledge all those pieces in the context of Director Beck's questions.
And she says thank you.
Director Klein-Jerome.
And you made the comment that, we'll look at this in the June and, what is our next step? that's too late. I think we need to be looking at what are we doing this summer, because there truly are kids that are going to need that, and some of them that need it won't show up anyway. But we still need to. We can't wait for the spring scores to say, okay, what are we going to provide this spring, this summer, and then next fall. So, I think the next step isn't waiting for us to see spring scores before we make a decision.
Good point.
I apologize. I just meant that's when the next time we would see those.
Yeah,
I
and I
apologize.
understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying the ball's got to start rolling.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess seeing all this data myself, I feel that obviously we need more supports in curriculum because, I mean, we've never been at 80%. So obviously there's something there and we need to get more supports into our building because it just can't be all on the teachers or the pairs that are in those rooms with them and the building principals. I don't know if it's we need more supports in the building to help out with these things. And so it's kind of a shared burden versus just, someone trying to do it all. And it's obviously what we've been doing. Yes, we do have some growth in some areas. Obviously, it's not working. So we need to change it. I'm glad we're a lot more aggressive with things now than we've ever been, and it's a good thing. And everybody doesn't get stuck in the same pattern, and we're changing things up and we're getting things done. But, and I don't know if that's the wrong takeaway from that data, but it looks like we definitely need some more supports in our curriculum and how we're rolling things out. Because if that's the overall district scores, it's not just at one building, it's not just one teacher, one principal. It's an overarching district issue.
Yeah, I know that your principals feel a great sense of urgency there. You have great leaders at the building level that take these data very seriously. You have instructional coaches that are doing everything they can to move the needle too, and your teachers are doing the same thing. It's about creating a system that envelops them with the tools and resources and predictability in the system so that they can function at their full capacity. That's really what I think it's about. You have great adults. And now how do we, as the governing body, leverage the resources and the systems changes that need to occur so that they can do their job the way that we know they can?
Director Kleindrum?
In the reorganization of central office, moving people to buildings, will this have direct impact and help? Are some of these people going to the buildings actually going to work with some kids instead of just telling the teacher what to do and the principal?
The goal is to provide the support for the building.
What's that look like?
So what does that? It's very similar to what they do now. So if a teacher needs support, a different strategy, if the building level people need support, that I would imagine there would be times where those specialists would work with students, but their main goal is to help improve the system. And so they're not going to be subbing. Well, they probably will, but their main job stays very similar. But the difference is they're in the building, helping move the needle, helping support, having their eyes on the ground. And so the specialists that will be moving into the buildings, that's their main goal, is to be boots on the ground. Where are we? Where are we going? And constantly trying to move that needle.
Director Snyder.
My last question would be, we know this is going to take more than just conventional teaching, more than what teachers, more time than what they have in a given day. Do we have some type of guide or some type of roadmap that we could send out to parents? Because it's going to take parent support. It's going to take everybody. Something that they can do with their child, in the evenings, more reading, more something to take the strain off of what the kids, because frankly, kids are kids as well. You can only cram so much to them in a given set of hours during the day. But is there a roadmap or something that we can give to parents to help us get their kids caught back up?
I don't know of any off-the-shelf resource. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. I just don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Director Poston?
Well, just kind of a follow-up to what Karen brought up as far as the reorganization. That I would hope that these people that are out in the buildings, they will be in the classroom and they will, get the feel for what's going on in the building. Otherwise, what's the point in having them there?
Well, they absolutely will be in classrooms more. Absolutely.
I do want to say, so I want to answer your question about the literacy guides, but also the specialists this year has been unique with school closure, but they always did go to buildings. So they had a specific, the curriculum specialists who are in the curriculum department all went out to buildings 3 days a week. They had buildings that they were assigned to, but they also did the walkthroughs and the implementation of the things that we were talking about, like enhanced alphabetic knowledge, right? When we roll that out, we don't just roll it out and wish. We go in, we support teachers side by side. When there was an issue at SMART with some subs, all the curriculum specialists went down and taught alongside other teachers. And many people did that. So I just want to ensure that we have that outlook, that this is something that they will be excited to do again, because it is part of their passion as educators. And they're a very dedicated group of professionals. As far as a literacy guide, teachers are providing those resources to their families. Last year we had school closure, right? And we still have our Return to Learn site for parents that has all of those resources specific to literacy. It has other things with math, and teachers are working alongside parents, along with, we have family liaison family liaisons at all of our title buildings, and that is part of their role, is to reach out to parents, support them with literacy strategies that they can work with their students on, their children.
Great, thank you.
You just mentioned title buildings, and that's one question when I've been visiting buildings. And that, what determines what is a title building?
So what we do in our district is we rank order our buildings in terms of free and reduced lunch. And then from there, we serve any district, in any building that falls essentially above the district average. So that's been our past practice. Now, if somebody jumps up, for example, if the boundaries change, or if a different apartment complex comes in that changes the free and reduced lunch in those buildings, then that's looked at and adjusted every year. That's how we do that. The choice to do it that way is it allows us to actually have a lot of dollars to go at our most neediest buildings.
And how many is that?
Right now it's 13.
One last question. When did we get all of that data, and how long have we had it?
When did you finish screening? Well, the window didn't close until.
So if you remember, in October, I came and presented, it was a specific request for K-3 literacy. So you had the fall data. Then the window closed at it was the beginning of February 4th.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, you obviously already have a plan in place and what you're going to implement to try to correct some of these things. What I'm getting at is it safe to ask that at a meeting in May, you guys can come and say, all right, this is the data you saw, this is our plan going forward on how we're going to do this?
So where we are right now in terms of our plan, the Davenport plan, is that we are focused on crisis response violence prevention. In a typical data cycle, we would do absolutely that. We would be looking at that winter data. We would be looking at the data that we've collected. We would have had ISASP data from the previous year, and we would begin to build next year's systemic plan, the comprehensive school improvement plan. That's what we would begin working on now. And what that feeds into is it feeds into buildings creating their plan that's connected to the district plan, and then a boot camp, a leadership academy that kicks off the start of the year. And then from there on out, the AEA supports the different layers. So if we have buildings that are comprehensive buildings and they need more support, then those supports will be layered into those buildings. For us, in our plan, that's getting ready to be talked about with the Department of Ed and the Davenport Community School District. What's the next step that we need to take? MTSS, PBIS, early literacy, and those areas, those huge lifts with disproportionality baked in the cake. So it's not separate. As you see today, we talked about early literacy and we talked about what do our subgroups look like. Mm-hmm. And so in a typical year, that's how that would that's how that would roll out. Right now, we are really focusing on that singular crisis response, violence prevention, the vehicle of how that rolls out. How are we monitoring that system? And then the next steps are going to be help co-facilitated with the Department of Ed. So absolutely, that is on our plan. Next steps to be talked about, and in what order will be help facilitated with Shane and the Department of Ed and Bill.
Okay, so
to answer your question, would it be, could we come back in May with a plan on how we're going to roll out literacy? Potentially, if that's the directive, if that's the direction the Department of Ed believes that we're ready for.
I think this, to address it, the summer school plan is going to be dialed in at that point. So that's a piece. That's not the whole, because that's not the long-term systemic change. But that's it. To me, that's a very high leverage action, because that is a gap closing measure that needs to take place with a high degree of urgency.
Okay, that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
What are the things we're doing like right now to correct some of those things for the spring test and stuff like that? So I guess that's what I'm asking for clarification on that. So if that's something that could be presented to us at a meeting in May, I don't know if you could have it done by, we only had by one of the meetings.
I think that's a very good time, May, to discuss accelerated learning opportunities. I think that's a great opportunity to do that.
Director Klein-Jerome?
And I am one board member. This is my opinion. I don't get a vote at the table with the Department of Ed. This has to be a priority. We cannot just say, okay, what do you think else? No, this has to be a priority. There are too many gaps, too many losses in scores. And again, I don't get a vote at the table, but as a board member, student achievement is very important. That's what I ran on. One of the things that has to be a priority. And again, I don't get a vote, but I'm going to express my opinion on it.
Well, I want you to know that it is very relieving to hear our board members talk like that, to have this conversation, because there are times in the past when we would present this data and it would just be glossed over. But as I can see, that this is very important to this school board, and that it doesn't matter where oversight lies. When you guys say this is important to us, it's going to be looked at, it's going to be reviewed. And so that's relieving to hear you say that, and much appreciated. And I feel that sense of urgency from everybody. With sense of urgency comes a sense of panic, maybe, or whatever the word might be, from our teachers and administrators. And I just want to echo what everybody's saying here. We have hardworking teachers, we have hardworking administrators, and when a task is set in front of them, and they accomplish it. And if not, we'll support them with the network that we're creating. So I think it's a great idea would be to come back talking today. What does it look like? Plus, I think that would alert our community as well to the opportunities that are going to be there. So I think that would be a great outcome from this meeting. And to have a systemic way that we're looking at and talking at this data is a powerful strategy. So thank you for that.
TJ, this is Bill Decker. Can I add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to add to TJ's answer to Karen's question. The Department of Ed is working on strategies to roll out statewide. So this isn't something that the department is looking at. There's a whole bunch of strategies, and just, are we going to let Davenport do this or not? The strategies to be implemented for all districts across the state have not been released yet. And I would imagine that administrators and boards all across the state are in the same spot that you expressed, Karen. It's alarming to see this kind of data, and the department is working to create systemic processes for both the short term and the long term, and we do expect them to roll that out soon, and we do expect to have conversations about how that plays out in Davenport. But it's not something, I didn't want you to have the impression that this is something that is out there for everybody else and they're just trying to decide about Davenport. We will certainly be implementing strategies when those become available.
Thank you, Bill. Director Poston.
Yeah, first I want to thank Karen for those comments, because that's exactly what I'm thinking. This has got to be a priority. This is a Davenport school district issue problem, and why are we waiting on a directive from the Department of Ed? We can't just keep talking about it. We need action, and we need action now.
Director Kleindrum.
Where does math fit in all this? I mean, we focus on reading, and I truly believe that's important, but I also see math as also just as important. And I don't know if we know where our scores are, and have we taken the same kind of dive? Is that something we also need to look at?
We do look at math as well, and all of our buildings they look at both literacy and math data, and we've done that historically in the past. I mean, that would be something that you could ask for data on our math scores, and we would be able to share that with you. We also, this week is ISASS, so that's our statewide assessment. So that's happening at all of our buildings now, and that's another measurement that we can look at for looking at our data, right, for math and for ELA and reading.
Well, thank you very much. I think now we're on to the, Harry, you wanted to debrief on this, correct? Are you still there?
I'm still here. Why don't you slide on to the other piece? And, do you have anything else, Shane or TJ, on disproportionality? Or if not, we can Lou and I can jump in now.
Yeah, green light. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you. And my Joe, my screen's a twitch jumble here, so bear with me. I'm seeing a couple of slides. So two thoughts, and then a couple of questions for you as board members and superintendent. A couple insights that caught my attention were Shane was pretty articulate, and I applaud, as TJ has said, your desire to, what do we do next? What are we waiting for? How soon are we going to do this? And the reality is a piece, it's not a green light to stall. And I also applaud Superintendent Schneckloth's comment about, sure, we can come back in May with another update on where we are and how our game plan is shaping up. Back to what Shane had said, you're probably into this for particularly the early literacy over the next couple of years to remediate and backfill on the students and where their attention and focus needs to be on improving their learning and literacy, particularly given COVID and the impact. And so when you think about it in terms of the long haul, there are some things you'll be doing soon, and likewise some things that likely already started, but it's a long haul. It'll be important to keep reminding yourself that. The other piece that I hear, as Shane, Superintendent Schneckloth, and other Corey have talked, is this balance of our capacity to do the things we need to and do them well. My home example, if my home needs electrical, water issues, roofing issues, at some point there I have to prioritize which pieces I can do first and how soon can we start the next one. And my guess is that's probably where TJ and staff and the AEA find themselves in the DE is doing the things you already have some momentum on well, continuing to layer the other pieces, and do that in a manner where the wheels don't fall off. TJ or Shane would welcome a quick reaction to that, and then want to invite a board member comments and reflection.
I think that's absolutely critical, and the word that comes to mind is leverage. So as we move forward, which one of those will have the highest leverage, similar to the halo effect that Shane had talked about. So I believe that statement is accurate. I like the way you worded that.
Shane, anything else you'd add? I was trying to listen what you say and try to help think about our role, ISB, trying to be a support to the board and also administration as you move forward. Any additional thoughts from you, Shane?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the board's sense of urgency and at the same time recognizing that you can overload the system pretty quickly. So sequencing the actions out, identifying those priorities with a high degree of purpose, and then attacking those intentionally without overloading the system and asking for more than what is accomplishable. So I think the quality of implementation is really important.
And I appreciate Superintendent Schneckloth continuing to say, board, your questions, your comments, where your antenna is up is exactly what's beneficial. That's a key part of your role. And so as they're talking, as I'm sharing, it's not to quelch or stifle the things that you feel an urgency about. It's to help build shared understanding with you about what do we have to be like so we can do a good job of tackling those things. And in what kind of order, how fast can we tackle them and still not have the wheels fall off? So, two questions for you as board members and board team and for Superintendent Schneckloth is you guys back to your 8 questions. So first thing to ask you, questions 1, 2, 3, and 6 were the ones that were identified by you before we started this conversation tonight. You thought those might likely be the most relevant to your learning tonight. So as you look at those 4 questions, 1, 2, 3, and 6, which of those did seem to play out that way, that were really helpful to building your understanding? And President Gosa, feel free to draw a couple of folks into this. What insights do your colleagues have? Which of those questions were most helpful?
Director Hayes.
Yeah, number 6 was relevant for me, and during the conversation, we did come out with May as being one of the next updates that would be provided. With 1, 2, 3, and 6 being the main questions, I put 4 in here for this particular conversation. With this, we were talking about the supports that were needed, and during that conversation, I was thinking, Director Snyder said something going out to parents to assist, and I was thinking of previous meetings that we had with mentors in the community that we could draw in more individuals possibly to assist with this, because, with the number of students that we have, the more people that are involved with this, I think it will be better for the district.
Absolutely, and as you were sharing that, I find myself thinking those ought to be on your menu when Superintendent Schneckloth and Mr. Williams and others present an update in May. You ought to keep falling back on those questions. What else do you need from us? What else do you need from us? What are next steps? And you may find as a board that next steps you wish they were coming faster. Regardless, those are critical questions to keep asking. What are next steps? What's coming next? What do you need from us? And to continue that. Somebody else, President Gosa, thoughts about how these questions played out in your learning?
Director Snyder.
Well, I think pretty much every one of these questions was addressed by either us or in the presentation, and I think were pretty much offered up by Corey and Shane without having asked them. But which question I think as a board and the discussions tend to focus the most on 3 and 4, as I think 3 was one that we figured was going to play an important role, but I think those two is where we spent the majority of our time.
Yeah, thank you. And as you'd hope it would be, that your administration or your presenters from the AEA are focused on the same key things. You can see your questions and what you want to know having an influence. Maybe one or two more folks. President Gosa?
Director Poston, did you have anything?
Well, I agree with Jamie. I think most of this has been covered with the questions we already asked, and I would agree with Linda. Number 4, I would throw in there along with number 1. Again, we need to know what you need from us as a board after a while.
Anyone else, Dan, or should we slide on to the last question we had for you?
Director Klein, Jerome, do you have anything? Harry, I guess the one thing I'll add, and Shane just actually kind of touched on that, when stuff is presented to us, we kind of want a result right now, and we want to know next steps, but then sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, probably more so than anybody, and then I catch myself, well, am I asking too much that I'm taking away from this, and now you're not focusing your time on this because I'm asking you for this. And it's, I always find myself, like after meetings and stuff, asking myself what the fine line is, what do I want to ask for, and what do I expect when we're trying to do a whole lot of things, and what do I want to take away from, I guess, in the lack of a better term. But as far as the questions, I think number 4 was really a big thing, you know. And then 5, you know, I had asked, you know, can you give us an update on your plan, how you're going to roll it out, how things are working, you know, for a meeting in May. So I think that was a big thing, too.
Yes, and again, not as an advocate for you as a board and a board superintendent leadership group. The intent here is, and I listen to your administrators, it's not to squash or kill the questions you're asking. You keep asking those, but as a colleague said to me a lot of years ago, when I say, can I ask you a question? And this person said, sure can, but are you ready to hear my answer? And that's such an important piece. So when you ask that question, it's an opportunity to also listen and strive for understanding when TJ or Shane or Corey or another staff member provide information. How receptive am I? How receptive are you to understanding why it may be another month or two, or what the game plan is? Not to squelch the question, but to understand everything won't happen at warp speed all right at once, but that's not an excuse for that it should take forever. Trying to find that balance. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then my last thing to ask you, if you would just either on your laminated materials or on the guide you have tonight, if you would turn to page 3, it's the page after your 8 questions. And Lou, feel free to jump in, but I would ask you, look at question A and B. Pick one of those and quickly either share an insight or two that you learned tonight. For a community member that watched this meeting, or somebody that watches the recorded version, or somebody that didn't catch it, what are at least 1 or 2 things you learned tonight? What was an essential learning? Or comment about the questions, or what furthered your understanding from these questions that were built into their presentation or that you added. So what's a takeaway or two? Looking at questions A and B. And then President Gosa, if you just guide us quickly around the room. Lou and I will take notes.
Director Snyder.
I would say, from what I would want people to see is, 1, don't look at these numbers and think they are a direct reflection of the efforts of our teachers, because our teachers are in these classrooms working their butts off doing double the lesson planning, still preparing for online, still preparing for in person, and have been tasked with the impossible and trying to play catch up. And it is certainly not all on the teachers, these numbers. And I don't think we've fully realized the effects that COVID has had on our classrooms. And I think we're going to be finding more of these things coming down the road where we're having to get our kids caught up.
Thank you.
Director Poston.
Well, I think what Shane presented to us, sheds light on, the work we have ahead of us. And it's going to take time. It's probably not going to happen fast enough for me, but I understand that the rollout has to be a quality rollout. I guess I still am questioning, what as a board we are going to do next and how we can help in filling that role.
It'll be important that you bring that lens back again to your May meeting. And I gotta believe Shane and Superintendent Schneckloth, that's clearly on their mind as well. Thank you.
Director Klein Jerome.
I think as a board, we need to support our buildings, the staff, paras, teachers, principals, and we need to ask the buildings what their needs are and how we can help them. I don't always think it's great to top down and just say, this is what y'all need, because you may not need it. So as a board and as an administration, I hope we are not treating them as one size fits all.
Thank you.
Director Hayes.
I learned that this is a very critical situation. With everything else that we're doing, this is one thing that we certainly have to work on as well. This is one of those situations where it truly, truly takes a village to raise children right now. The teachers can't be tasked with this. You accept your oath to teach children as much as you can, but learning should never stop. This needs to take place in the classroom. It needs to take place at home. It needs to take place at summer school. Everyone has to come together and help, because right now, with the achievement gap, if we don't do something about this now, that it's only going to widen, and we can't afford to do that. COVID is something that we had no control over whatsoever, but in spite of that being the reason, we certainly can't make that the excuse, and we need to do something about this, and everyone needs to address it.
Thank you.
Harry, I think I agree with all of my colleagues. And then I think there was a lot of great questions asked. And some of the questions asked added on to other questions. And also, I think one of the biggest takeaways from tonight is for our staff to know that we know they're working really hard right now. All staff. I don't want to single out any group because I know everybody's putting in the extra effort to do things all the way down throughout the buildings, and to know that that we had talked about those things, because I'm pretty sure as many YouTube hits as we get, everybody watches our meetings, and they know what's going on. So that way they know that we are appreciating everything they're doing, as well as we've seen the data on this, and the data is not looking very good for this year, and it looked like we were having progress, but obviously we're not where we should be. So there's obviously more work to do, but it's nice, to have these conversations so people know we are talking about it and we are looking at it. So I do think that, everybody's putting in everything they can do during this time, and hopefully our spring results look good. And I agree with Director Klein Jerome that sometimes when we do some of these things, it is nice to have the people from the building coming in and telling us, because like she said, it could be us thinking something here, but they need something completely different to make it more effective for them. And again, the other thing I had said about, if we have too many expectations on things, what things does that take away from and things like that. And I think that's all I had. Director Snyder.
I've got some key thoughts from Allison that are important, so I want to make sure I read them. She says, key thoughts. We have a lot of work to do, but having the data makes it much easier to see what issues there are and how we might begin to address them. That being said, I want to make sure that our people know that they matter and no one person is responsible for numbers that we need to improve on. Also, she says she realizes how critical it is to stop the learning loss.
Yeah, and I want to just build on it, the idea that, and you've been very thoughtful about this as a board superintendent team tonight, not blaming, but as Linda said, also no excuses. It's a system need as a school system. What can we do? What do we need to be like to tackle this situation, make a difference? How about Superintendent Schneckloff, a takeaway or two from you? And then I'll mute myself after this piece.
My biggest takeaway is that we've been reviewing data like this for a long time, and this has to be one of the best senses of urgencies I felt coming off of a committee of the whole. So a big takeaway for me is that this board has a huge priority on student learning, and that is when this board focuses on something, and I say in a very positive manner, this board, because I'm watching this board gel. I'm watching this board come together and asking questions that drive the administration to implement or to move forward on something, and that is I really appreciate that, and so do our students and our families and our staff members, and so to hear the gratification towards our staff members and at the same time know that we've got a lot to do. That's the attitude that's going to move us forward. And that's what I heard tonight. And I heard great questions. What do you need from us? I heard that question. And moving forward, being able to identify what the board can do is going to be critical for us. So that's a huge next step. Because if the board members ask, what do you need from us? We need to be prepared for that. And so that was a huge takeaway from me for tonight's meeting.
My final comment would be on this same page 3 of that tool with questions for next time. We'll see you in May, but look at item D and E, particularly D. Give some thought what you learned tonight, what you learned at the subsequent April meetings and at the May COW meeting, Committee of the Whole. We'll be asking you. So you've chipped away and continue working with these questions, getting into a cadence. What can you do as a board superintendent team to strengthen your discussions the next time so that you come prepared, ready to talk about that? So thank you. I will mute myself, listen in on the next piece, but not talk anymore. So appreciate your time tonight. Good discussion.
Thanks, Harry. Did Luann have anything she wanted to add, or were you speaking for both of you?
No, I'm great. I was going to say some things, but TJ, you pretty much just said what I was going to say in a way better way. So thank you so much for all your hard work and all you're doing for your students and staff.
Thank you both for taking the time out of your Monday night to work with us. We appreciate it. And now we will move on to the youth leadership team discussion. Did you want to say anything, Superintendent, or Shane Williams? You can go ahead and kick it off.
Do you guys want to break it all? Or are you good?
Oh, do you guys need a break? We are at like 2 hours.
How long is this next one going to last approximately, you think?
Depends on how many questions. Probably 10 minutes of content. But I know that the board is eager and asks a lot of questions about this and wants to learn more about it. There's a lot of enthusiasm about the youth leadership team. So I definitely want to give it the time it deserves.
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
And we're back. Are we? Making sure we're rolling live. All right, Shane, we'll let you take it away.
Well, I know the last committee, the whole meeting, the board had a lot of questions about youth leadership teams, a lot of energy and positivity about what the next steps were going to be. And we're at that point now in the CRVP implementation where we're transitioning now more to this youth leadership team focus. That's not to say that we're taking our eye off some of the great work that's already been done and that's been implemented in the buildings, but this is that next phase in the implementation of the CRVP plan. So I want to kick this off just by laying out the context for why student voice is so important. I think, again, just based on the questions that you asked a month ago, clearly this is a priority and a mindset I think we all share. Nevertheless, I think that this is a great video that captures that essential message.
Student voice, it's taken so many years to be implemented into education. We're in the education system for over 12 years.
Joe, can you turn that up?
Why don't we have a say in it?
If we can't have an effect at our school, how are we supposed to have an effect in the world?
In a lot of my friends' experience, they feel like what they're being taught is not relevant to what they want to do in the future.
As consumers of the decisions that are being made by the administration, we should have a right to voice our own opinions.
Their education, and we make as adults decisions for kids without involving them in the decision-making process, or at least knowing what the options are.
They're the ones that are being taught to on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that are learning from the process.
It's important to not lose that lens of being inclusive of student voice.
We have to completely redesign our education to make it more well-rounded and more beneficial for the students of the future.
Education should be personal. It shouldn't just be structural. It's important that everybody's voice is heard.
If students are involved in what they're learning and it's relevant to them, they'll be more interested.
And with engagement comes higher graduation rates, lower dropout rates, lower absenteeism rates.
We help shape our own path to what we want to become.
That is the importance of student voice, is being heard and being involved. I think it's a win-win for students and teachers.
We have students who have the potential to create something great. A school that is supportive of student voice is a school that puts in trust in the students. By building relationships with teachers and building relationships with others and really feeling that sense of community at your school, that is when you start to want to learn. You'll become more interested and intrigued to pursue education and pursue the paths that you want to take.
So the team that's putting this together at the AEA, in conjunction with Jay, Corey, and the district CRVP team, started to think about youth leadership teams. There we go. Thinking about youth leadership teams in the context of CRVP, and we started thinking that youth leadership teams could be so much more. Empowering students to have voice and ownership over the school culture should expand beyond the CRVP effort. And there are some traditional mechanisms. We have student council, we have some other leadership teams, but this is really a way to leverage student voice to impact the entire system. CRVP is the initial focus out of the gate. That said, this is going to be a much more expansive and inclusive effort beyond the CRVP efforts. So I want to walk you through the sequence of actions that have started to occur, give the board a chance to process some of those pieces, and then talk a little bit about next steps with respect to the youth leadership teams. So far what we've done is we've run this by the Department of Education for their approval, and they've given us some feedback as well. They've been great partners. We gave the overview to the district CRVP team and the principal calibration team. And then last Friday, we actually had a meeting with principals and the building youth leadership team facilitator for 1 hour. And we broke that up into multiple sessions throughout the day so that folks could join when it was most convenient for them. TJ sent out these slides to you all in the board update just so you could have a little bit of context so you'd know what was happening. What's coming next, We are actually going to be working with the district CRVP team tomorrow on what the actual content looks like. What does it look like to have a bona fide youth leadership team, and what does that training look like? Because what we're doing is we're taking this group of kids and we're trying to teach them that they're empowered, that they can have a voice, but what does that training look like? How do we provide parameters so that students understand what their role is and what their responsibilities are? So we're going to overview that training with the district CRVP team tomorrow. Then we have the principal calibration team on Wednesday to provide additional feedback. On April 15th, DSAT will engage in an overview of what the Leadership Academy module looks like. And then the Leadership Academy module, at which time principals, the building youth leadership team facilitator, as well as the kids will be joining for a training session for a module. And that will be, we have a high school session, a junior high session, and then a separate elementary session. It's not that the content is radically different, but it is a little bit different when you're talking to 16 to 18-year-olds than when you're talking to 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. So we do want to make sure that we personalize that as much as we possibly can. And this is the same cascade that we've used from the beginning of CRVP, where we start with that high-level kind of overview. We work with the Department of Education. Diane Campbell, Courtney Olson, and Kim Hoffman, our internal team that formulates this. They're our experts doing all the research and pulling the information together. They get those slides together, work with Jake and Corey and the full district CRVP team, take it to principals, take it to DSAT before we ever send it out into the wild, so to speak, to make sure that it works in the real world. So that's the same leadership cascade that we're using for the youth leadership team piece as well. I want to just highlight a couple of pieces on the slides. So this is all training that we went through last Friday. This was the module, just that overview piece for youth leadership team facilitators, as well as the principals. And you can see there's some very important pieces in here: embedding culturally responsive practices, making sure that we have those social emotional learning competencies embedded, making sure that this is consistent with the PBIS and the CRVP work, and then also always focusing on that multi-tiered system of supports. And ultimately what we're trying to drive is equitable outcomes for all children. So all kids feel like they have not just a stake in their education, but they have ownership and empowerment in driving what that educational environment looks like. I think this is an important piece. This is a follow-up from the student voice slide. And we processed this as teams. We did some breakout rooms. What idea from the video do you want to carry forward that will enhance your culturally responsive practices? I think that's really important. Again, I think that speaks to the idea of we're building a system to layer on some of those additional pieces that speaks to disproportionality, equity, again, student voice and student empowerment. The basis for some of the data to help us pull this together was the Conditions for Learning survey. Now, unfortunately, the information is a little bit dated because we didn't take this last year due to COVID, but we do have the Conditions for Learning survey information from 2019. So we actually want the students to get in there and analyze the data. The Conditions for Learning survey is largely driven by student voice, and it talks about their perceptions or their feelings within the context of their school when it comes to physical safety, emotional safety. And these are actually real Davenport numbers up here, and the percentage of students who responded positively to that survey. Now this year, because ISASP is in effect, we will have new Conditions for Learning survey information. We don't know exactly when we'll have that in hand. So again, we want to empower students to look at data, to have some ownership over their system. The downside right now is that the data is a little bit old. We also have the CE survey report, and this is less dated because this was actually done in winter, spring of 2020. And again, it speaks to those same pieces of emotional safety, physical safety, and it looks at those from a number of different angles. So we want the students to get in there so that they understand their full context. And these are some, I think, really good shifts. They speak to some of the questions that the board asked, just in terms of what that looks like and what systemic shifts need to occur. So a shift from seeing kids as passive recipients to active initiators and owners of school health and wellness, empowering them to have the desire and the capacity to be meaningful change agents, looking at kids from a strength-based and an asset focus rather than a deficit-based model when it comes to empowering youth, and then having structured formal processes. Again, I think there's a lot of informal processes that we engage with kids every day. So this really adds a formal mechanism that we can empower kids and make sure that their voice is part of the decision-making process. We ran through roles and responsibilities. This is a good model. This drives really pretty much everything we do, that continuous improvement process. So it's important to always have that model there, determining what our current state is, and then figuring out how we can have the highest impact possible on the system. We talked a lot about making sure that youth leadership teams are representative of the student population. So that's why you rule out things like traditional student council mechanisms, because they serve a great purpose. It's different than a youth leadership team purpose. So it's not, you have to vote to get in. It's not a popularity contest. We want this group to be representative of the demographics of the school, and also not just be your prototypical straight A students who are the high flyers. We want to hear from the students who find some challenges in the system so that they can help us remove those barriers that oftentimes stand in the way of kids' success. There's some really powerful tools in there, and we'll get to those resources toward the end of it. This is just a continuum of student voice. I think it's a good graphic that captures what we're trying to do. Is we're really trying to get kids to kind of work up that ladder of learner-driven, student-centered systems so that they feel like they're leaders, rather than just being able to, maybe express their opinions or to take surveys and those types of pieces, or attend pep rallies and those types of things. We really want to authentically empower student voice and so that they feel like they have ownership over their system. I want to get to the piece down here so that you can see the student selection process. So these are the parameters that we threw out there. And we got some great feedback from principals and youth leadership team facilitators at the building level, just about additional factors to consider. But you can see these. Here's what we want. We want kids represented from a lot of diverse backgrounds. Some of the items that we're looking for. Making sure that we're also thinking about existing structures that exist at the building levels and seeing if there's overlap and redundancy in those pieces. Then we had some next steps. You can see there, what I laid out at the beginning, what the Leadership Academy is going to comprise and how that's going to be laid out. We're getting that content pulled together right now. I talked about the vetting process with the district team, principal team, DSAT team, getting all that fleshed out and having a really squared away process so that when it comes time to bring those kids in a couple of weeks, we're ready to go. And again, we want there to be a level of authenticity. We're not just checking a box. This is a legitimate attempt for us to improve the entire system, predicated on student voice and student empowerment. These are references that our team at Mississippi Bend has used to formulate this. There are some great tools here. The Conditions for Learning Toolkit it really covers the totality of a lot of the considerations that you would think about. It also uses that database perspective, which we think is really important for kids to understand that their data and their voice is really important, and that will help us to make better decisions. So I'm going to pause there. I know that was really quick. At the same time, I know that some of these slides were sent out to you last week, so I didn't want to belabor too much on the details. The target audience for this particular slideshow was the principal and the youth leadership team facilitator. This was not developed for the kids. The kids will have a totally different type of module that's a little bit more kid-friendly. So that said, I want to pause there, see what questions board members have, either about what you see here, about that initial overview, about the next steps for the cascade and how we're going to roll this out in Davenport, what the next steps are in terms of working with the kids. Our plan is to have 2 sessions with students. So we're going to have that in April and May. And then our plan is to hit the ground running when kids come back in the fall. We'll already have those structures in place. We'll have the kids ready to go. We'll have to identify some new kids because we'll have new kids coming in and kids will shift from school to school. But our plan is that this is not a short-term change. This is a long-term systemic reform for the Davenport Community School District. And we think it's a major step in the right direction.
Director Klein Jerome.
I see you had a nomination form. Can anybody nominate kids could nominate themselves or other students or teachers and so on?
Yeah, it's pretty wide open. We do want to also acknowledge some of the structures that schools do have in place so that they can take some ownership over that. But what works for the schools and works for the kids. We want more green lights. We don't want to put stop signs in front of kids if they want to be a part of it. Now, that said, you can't have teams of 50 or 100 kids. That's not realistic. We gave some guidelines in terms of the number of students. Those are guidelines. If they're a little above or a little below, we can certainly make that work.
Okay, so I think it was like 10 to 15 in the high school. What if you have 30 kids that get nominated? Who's going to make the decision on which 10 or 15?
We're still working that out. We don't have that system totally figured out. That would be a great problem to have if we have, overwhelming demand, and that's a good thing, but at the same time, we do have to have a systematic response to that, and we don't have that totally polished yet. More than likely, that will be done at the building level. They've also talked about having a rotating system so that you're giving more kids an opportunity, so it's not like these kids are in and they're into perpetuity, that we have a rotating system so we get more kids through the system. Not totally finalized yet, though.
Director Hayes.
That was sort of my question, Shane. Are these kids on for the entire school year or quarter, semester? How, once they're on, are you on for as long as you'd like to be, or have you looked at that at all?
We're still looking at that, and some of these resources here will help to drive that too. I suspect, I'm speculating now, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the team because they've really done the heavy lifting on this. It's going to be longer than a quarter, but it doesn't necessarily, again, have to be extend into multiple years. There's some power in that because you get that continuity, and then you have the older kids who can serve as role models for the new kids. So there's pluses and minuses to both sides of that. And that, I would say that's true at every level. There was some discussion about what does that look like at the elementary level. And I think there's maybe a misconception that elementary is too young for that. We don't think that's the case. We think that kids that are really young have a lot to say and a lot to offer for the school system, and they see things from a perspective that is unique, and we should be listening to what their perspective is too. We do have it right now at 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th at the elementary, and normally it wouldn't include 3rd, but because we're at the end of the year, we want those 3rd graders to get primed and ready to go so that when they come back in the fall, they're 4th graders and they're leaders in their schools. And again, they're modeling that type of leadership and that type of voice that we want to see across all of our kids.
And as far as consistency amongst teams, it's important to remember that there's training that goes with it, which is really exciting that we are, as a district, in the past, historically, we had these leadership academies where we trained all the teachers. This is the first time that our students are going to be in our leadership academies and we're training them. And so that'll be important as far as like, if we're turning over kids quite a bit, we'd have to think about ongoing training, which we can do, but we'll have to be cautious about that. And within these groups, we want it to be groups of trust where kids can be open. They developed that those collaborative relationships, and they feel like they can speak their minds and speak their groups just like you would in any other good functioning team. And so we would want to approach that cautiously also, is how can we ensure that we're always having that trusting group relationship where they can speak openly and honest about how they're feeling and asking their questions.
I think that's really speaks to that continuity piece. I think some of the interesting discussion was around those transition years, like what happens when they go from 6th to 7th, if they were a great leader at the 6th grade, and then they move into intermediate school at the 7th grade. What does that look like? How do we have a smooth transition so that those students who have had the training can continue to impact their schools? And then also that 8th to 9th grade transition. And some of that, Director Hayes, we'll just have to work out on the fly. Like we won't have the system totally dialed into perfection out of the gate. We're going to have to learn, and we'll probably make some mistakes along the way and learn and get better over time toward a more coherent system.
Okay, thank you.
Director Snyder.
Well, this is a perfect place for Allison's question because she sent me this before Jake spoke, and it kind of ties into what Jake said. She asks, how long do we estimate it will take to get students to buy in, trust that their voices really do matter, especially at junior high and high school levels? Are we thinking multiple years, months?
Yeah, I think that goes to the importance of who the youth leadership team facilitator is. And I think that will be a measure of where the rubber really hits the road. When they see the things that they are suggesting and they're recommending be put into place and be put into action, that's where that will be. There's a slide. Can you go back to one? It looks like a very elementary slide. It's very colorful, the continuum piece. When I first saw this slide, Again, it looks like it's for elementary, but it could be, as you really read through this, the far left expressing, offering opinions, in my mind, that's sometimes where, as far as you get sometimes with students. You put them in a group and you say, what do you think? And then they say, here's what we think. And then we could move on and we're going to keep doing the things that we do. When we show the students that we're valuing the things that we're saying and that we're putting them into place, I don't think it would necessarily take years. If there's an idea that they're saying, here's how I would feel safer in school, I think this needs to, if teachers were in there, which most teachers are already in the hallway greeting students, but whatever that might be, and then the next day that thing happens, that is an immediate response, and that can make an immediate impact. And so it probably depends on listening to the students. And again, a part of this too, on that far right side of the spectrum there, is developing that leadership capacity among students. So at some point, the facilitator is just sitting back and watching them take the lead on some of these things, where the adult doesn't have to guide the discussion, where the students are trained and to have those discussions on their own. So that's kind of a side note, I guess. But I don't think it would necessarily, for maybe some of the bigger pieces, it might take some time. But when the students see that we're listening and following up with the suggestions and the actions and that we're valuing them, I think we could see some immediate buy-in from our kids.
She says, thank you that you answered it perfectly and cleared it up.
I have a couple questions. So I think it's a great thing first, by the way. I think it's awesome when you can involve the students in some of this stuff because they see everything that's going on in our buildings. So if they offer their opinions or suggestions, now how do they know that that's being listened to? Is that going to be something that you would present at a board meeting that, hey, these are some things that came up, or it would be, how will they know that their suggestions are being listened to and they're being talked about, I guess, would be my first question.
Well, first off, as far as it really depends on where the group is going and what kinds of ideas that they're bringing to the table. When they look at the Conditions for Learning survey data, and first off, training them on like really looking critically at data and all those pieces will be a huge training piece at the beginning anyway. I think it would be amazing to have some groups come in and present to the board. One piece, and it wasn't touched on in this particular presentation, is that the intent is that there will also be a district youth leadership team, representative of each of the buildings, having a member from each of those teams on a district group as a whole. So absolutely, I could see that group coming up here and confidently talking to you about the things that they're seeing. And as you know, students will tell you what they're really feeling is going on. And so if those kids come up here and they say, yeah, well, it's nice. I mean, I guess we get to talk, and maybe they serve us pizza or something, but they'll tell you that. You've seen them, when kids are presenting here, sometimes they'll be honest about it. And so I think we listen to the kids and we let them, we give them the microphone and we hear what they have to say.
Thank you. I think that's awesome. Then my other question, so whoever the facilitator is, so I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. They're not going to be wearing a suit and tie to these meetings, right? And the reason I asked this, so when I took the job that I have now, I used to wear slacks, a dress shirt, and all the time, but every person I meet with is in blue jeans and work boots. So I kind of can't dress down to their level so they were more comfortable, because otherwise they kind of brush you off and you're like the suit coming in. So I guess I was curious about that as well.
Well, the facilitators are staff that are in our buildings. They're identified by the principal as someone that met that qualifications of one that really would be able to pull in those kids and work with a very wide ranging spectrum of students. So they're already they're wearing whatever they're probably wearing to school as a staff member. But again, that's another example of again, you get that right facilitator on board and then say, if I came in here dressed in a suit, would it be different than if I was dressed in work boots and jeans or something, and having that discussion to say, does that are you intimidated by that? Are you less likely to be open about that? Or what do you think? So the short answer is they'll be wearing whatever they would be wearing typically to school, but those would be the kinds of discussions that might help to crack some of the code on helping us to build better relationships with our students.
Shane, will you go back to the conditions for learning data page? Imagine that youth leadership team right here. Imagine how rich the conversation would be around if you said, let's pick one of these. Looks like expectations and boundaries is something I want to hear more about. Why do you think this school scored that way? Can you imagine how rich that conversation would be? And as an administrator, as a building leader, you could think of 5 strategies that would come out of there that would relate to best practices, and you would want to implement them immediately because your students are asking for it. They're asking for that. And a lot of times educators feel that they put too much expectation and boundaries on students. And so, or physical safety. Could you imagine what that conversation would, or adult student relationships? That would be a huge one. What would it look like if that were at an 80? Boom. Can you imagine how some of our facilitators are going to go about that question? So what would it look like if we're successful? Conversations were happening like that, and then there were actions and results that were agreed upon because students, this is what they want their school to be like. I'm sure we all have walked into a classroom and said, talk to me about this, and the kids just have it. And it is fascinating and awesome and real and raw, and our kids are starving for it. And so as I'm sitting listening, that's when we'll know we're successful, as the students have a voice and those numbers are moving. Those numbers are improving. Those numbers are. Envision that conversation happening and then action coming out of it. That's the excitement.
Director Hayes.
You sort of led to my questioning, is this pretty much a structured agenda for students? Or like you said, with this up here and just kind of a free-for-all, everyone just kind of go in? Because I've actually been in a focus group at Williams, and some of the things that were said, it's like, you just kind of sometimes have to brace yourself for what they say, but they keep it totally 100 with you, and you meet them where they are, basically. So something like this, I think, expectations and boundaries, that would just kind of go and be real fruitful.
Director Snyder.
I don't have a question, but just a comment. I foresee, especially in your middle school and high school, I think a pretty large number of kids that'll be interested in this. And as a board member, I must say it's pretty exciting to be talking about something that isn't cutting a budget, that isn't reducing staff, that isn't fixing citations, that isn't doing anything other than assembling what could be one of the most powerful tools we have in listening to what the kids have to say. And it's pretty refreshing.
And I agree. This is, I'm excited about all CRVP stuff, but this section of it is really like energizing to me, to letting the kids have a voice in this. But this isn't just, we're talking about the conditions for learning right here, but this same model that we're setting up the structure so that when we talk about high school graduation rates, that group, it could run through that same system. When it talks about literacy, I mean, obviously early literacy might be a little different because it's at that very young level, but like literacy at that 4th and 5th and 6th grade level, like letting them see some of those same numbers and letting them have that conversation about what do you think. So I just to keep an eye that this is beyond just like one lane of CRVP or one lane of physical safety, but it'll be a structure that I think can have an impact on a lot of things.
I think you knocked it out of the park. No one else has any questions. Again, I think this is a great idea. Long overdue. It'd be interesting, some of those conversations that come out of that and some of the things that come up, especially when you have a district-wide team. I think that would really be great. I would be curious when you guys do this if we could get the numbers on how many people applied or were nominated to it at each grade level or whatever. I think that would be good, because then we'll know what kind of interest there is out there in that.
I might even suggest that so we have this initial session in April, a session in May, perhaps at the June committee of the whole meeting, you just have a comprehensive update on how those first 2 meetings went with the youth leadership teams, what we learned, what next steps are. And, it's not going to be perfect out of the gate. I think we all recognize that, but I think that it's a major step in the right direction. I appreciate the board's energy and enthusiasm behind it. I think it'll be great for kids. It'll be great for the community.
We'll get that on the calendar. Did anyone have any other questions? All right. And Director Beck, thanks for participating tonight. Your voice was very hoarse, but hopefully you'll be back to yourself on Monday night. Thanks again. Greatly appreciate it. Harry and Luann, thank you if you're still on. We appreciate it. And I will adjourn the meeting. Every time I do that, it makes me think so much.